Hello and welcome to a new cross-channel episode of the Shephard Defence podcast. I'm your host, Ben Vogel, joining you from London, but in Paris, hot foot from a day at Eurosatory. Senior naval reporter Harry Lye. Bonsoir, Harry.
Bonsoir, Ben.
Training and simulation reporter Norbert Neumann, making his podcast debut. Bonsoir, Norbert.
Hi, Ben. Excited to be here.
And welcome back to our freelance reporter Sam Beal, who specialises in trade show podcast appearances after making his debut last year at DSEI. Bonsoir, Sam.
Bonsoir, Ben. Thank you for having me back.
Bonsoir tout le monde. And I will continue in English, much to everyone's relief. As we do have a team on the ground at Eurosatory, it's no surprise that we'll be looking at the land systems sector in this particular episode. So let's have a look closer at the show. Let's see what's making the headlines and what the big surprises are, both in terms of the systems on display, the programme announcements, but also to see if there's anything conspicuous by its absence. But before we do dive into all of that, I think it's worth pointing out to the listeners that the panel that we do have on hand tonight is entirely new to Eurosatory. Isn't that true, Harry?
Yeah, it's my first time here in Eurosatory. Not my first time in Paris, but first time at Eurosatory. It's interesting coming from the naval domain and kind of being surrounded by armoured vehicles and UAVs. But I suppose there's a reason that the first tanks were built in shipyards and have got holes. So it's not too far a stretch of an imagination for a naval reporter like myself.
Well, I hope you're not slumming it too much.
Yes, it's my first time too at Eurosatory, but I'm not entirely new to covering land domain, as I used to do that I did that at last DSCI. But it's good to be here. It's a great show. It's good to meet people in person again. Loads to see. Yeah.
And no, I'm also a complete Eurosatory neophyte, but I am covering the land domain again, so there are some familiar faces that I saw at DSEI last year, and we've all been comparing notes about the different show layouts. And even though Eurosatory is, I think, a bigger show, it feels a little bit smaller, it's more compact, so that's been quite nice.
So at least you haven't had to travel from, kilometres from one end of a show to another to dash between appointments. That must be a relief.
No, my only problem has been getting stuck in a bit of a fever dream where I left an interview and then thought I was on my way back to the press room, but did a complete loop and found my way back where I started. So it's been interesting.
You're a bit too young to have senior moments, Harry. That's the kind of thing that I would regularly do myself, but I've got the excuse of being an old fart. But anyway, I'd like to start with your thoughts, Harry, just turning to the matter at hand, especially as you've been particularly busy recently. This is your second show in very quick succession after UDT in Rotterdam. So you've, as we've discussed, this is your first time at Eurosatory. What are your sort of general impressions on what's on display?
Yeah, as you said, two shows in quick succession. It's kind of the gap year in Europe that I never had. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks. But Eurosatory has definitely been interesting from a land perspective. There's a huge amount of armoured vehicles from the usual customers that you'd expect, your Rheinmetalls, KMWs, Nexters, which I'm sure we will delve into shortly. But also lots of light vehicles as well. So GM Defence, some of the American companies, AM General, the UK kind of light vehicles, Supercat. They've all had something on show that's been interesting, new, pushing forward some kind of existing technologies into different areas. So it's definitely been really interesting to see the range of vehicles on show.
And bearing in mind that we are recording this particular episode of the podcast halfway or slightly less than halfway through the show, what have been personally for you the most important kind of highlights that you've seen?
I think the tracked boxer, that was really interesting. I saw the kind of patent files from KMW quite a long time ago when they were put in, and it kind of back then you kind of were waiting for this vehicle to come into existence, and here it is now on the static displays. So it's it's really interesting to see the Boxer concept of the modules being put into a tracked platform, so it gives it more flexibility. It's interesting. It looks slightly wider than a normal Boxer, which I imagine is for track widths and making sure it's mobile. But yeah, it's a really interesting platform. Clearly, quite a few years of work have gone into it, and it'll be interesting to see how that makes its way into the Boxer user community, because there's plenty of Boxer users who own modules. Countries like the UK buying into the Boxer program. That the UK, for example, we're kind of phasing out Warrior. There won't be a tracked IFV in the UK fleet. So it poses an interesting question as to whether the UK potentially buys a turreted wheeled Boxer, or maybe, seeing as it's buying the modules, will move into the tracked Boxer user club as well. Not that I'm aware of any customers yet, but I think Chris Foss did a bit of a rundown of the tracked Boxer in one of his pieces from the show.
Indeed, that's correct. Listeners will be able to access our Eurosatory show site with the Chris Foss story that is free of charge until the 27th of June on that particular note. So yes, it does seem like this is one of the highlights from Eurosatory so far. The Boxer, the concept, the design, the development has been around for a long time, as you say, but there does seem to be this constant innovation path based along this kind of modular approach.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Lots of companies talking about modular and that kind of thing. So it seems to be a common theme across the domains these days is modularity and doing more with what you've got. So it'd be interesting to see how that one plays out. And
speaking of doing more with what you've got, you spoke to Supercat about their HMT Mark II extender, and there's an interesting new feature that they've integrated on that particular vehicle, I believe.
Yeah, so they've worked with AM General and Mandus to integrate a 155mm gun with soft recoil technology. So it's really interesting. There are countries that already operate the HM2. There's countries that operate 105mm guns, and I mean, when you look at everything that's going on at Ukraine at the moment, there's been a lot of emphasis on long-range fires, things like 155mm, the M777, Caesar, these larger guns that have been deployed. But it's interesting that kind of how there is a utility for a smaller vehicle with a lighter gun that can potentially be a little bit more tactile, a little bit more mobile. And one of the key features of it, I was speaking to them today, is the ability to shoot and scoot. So they think that you can kind of get to your position, ready the gun within 30 seconds, fire 5 to 9 rounds within a minute, and then be on your way within 30 seconds. So as I'm sure lots of people have seen, the development of counter-battery fire and how quickly you can locate and pinpoint where you're being shot at from with artillery, the ability to be able to launch some rounds and move very quickly is a hugely important requirement. So this is an interesting way of looking at that challenge. And as you say, it's an existing vehicle. They said they've not had any discussions with the UK MOD about kind of the UK MOD buying it yet. But the company's planning to do a roadshow this year and kind of present it to Army, and so that'll be an interesting one to see how that develops. The Army already operates the vehicle, so maybe there's scope for kind of integrating it into the fleet.
Indeed, let's watch with interest, and certainly, as you mentioned, Harry, shoot and scoot. Very much a priority, well, not an emerging priority. It's always been a priority, I suppose, for artillery units, but it's definitely risen in importance with the visual evidence of what we've seen from Ukraine. Also, on the show floor, I think there's been quite a lot of emphasis on uncrewed or unmanned systems and autonomously piloted uncrewed systems. There are a couple of stories that we've run on our Eurosatory site from Teledyne FLIR and Textron, and I believe that you were both involved. That you were involved with both of them, Harry.
Yes. So spoke to Textron ahead of the show, and their Ripsaw M5, which has been kind of developed for the US Army for the Robotic Combat Vehicle Medium program. That is kind of a version of that. M5 is now available internationally without ITAR restrictions. So that's certainly an interesting development in the UGV market. It's kind of another fairly large UGV product going into the market. What they're offering is a flatbed variant. So essentially, potential customers can bring whatever systems they want and integrate them onto the top of it. So there's a large flat space. You can put what you want on it. And that's certainly interesting to see how that's developed, especially as it's come from a US Army program to kind of make its way into being a system that is available for export. It's definitely interesting, and the Robotic Combat Vehicle program has been watched quite eagerly. This platform, obviously, that's available for international sale doesn't have the Kongsberg turret and things like that, which feature on the US Army's version, but it's still interesting nonetheless.
Indeed, yes, and we will be hopefully paying close attention to the Robotic Combat Vehicles program in our AUSA coverage later in the year.
Yeah, I'm sure that will be of key interest at the time as things mature, and that the US Army is actually doing some trials, kind of not in the not too distant future, further trials with the RCVM. So it'll certainly be interesting. I imagine it'll be one that our esteemed land reporter Flavia will be able to delve into closer to the time. And
you make a very good point about using a UGV almost as a blank canvas on which you can integrate a lot of other systems, including things like remote weapon stations. That's definitely something that Milrem, another exhibitor at Eurosatory, has been very keen to promote and demonstrate, particularly with some recent live firings with the Kongsberg RT40 turret. So very much UGVs continue to evolve and develop. Thank you very much indeed, Harry. We'll come back to you a little bit later, but let me just turn to Norbert, and welcome to the podcast again, Norbert. And I understand that not only is this first Eurosatory for you, but it's also your first ever time in Paris.
Yes, that is correct, and I'm definitely absorbing the French vibe, trying my awful French accent every now and again.
Can't be as bad as mine. And I've got to apologise for making you stay up late each night this week and write lots of Eurosatory stories, so you can't go out and enjoy yourself. But you are having a little bit of a holiday after the show, so I hope you have a good time then. But back to the matter at hand, and I would just ask the same question that I asked Harry. Given that you've been looking around the show, your main expertise is in military simulation and training, but you do have a little bit of experience of covering the land sector as well. So what's been kind of surprising or not surprising about Eurosatory?
Yes, I will not talk about any of the larger companies that Harry has mentioned, but I would point at one of the Polish companies, WB Group, and it's interesting because Poland has been receiving, and Polish companies have been receiving the limelight recently for obvious reasons. But WB Group is a very interesting company, not just because they've been delivering different kind of equipment to Ukraine since 2014, 2015, according to their own admission, but also because the company is mainly an electronic solutions company, yet they're producing loitering munitions, UAVs, and various communication systems. They have sold one of their main solutions to L3 Harris a few years ago, so some of the equipment is in infantry vehicles in the US and across the UK as well. And they have a loitering munition called Warmate, the name coined by the Ukrainian defense minister. I think he posted something on Twitter, and that's how they actually named this product. And it's very interesting because Shephard has published a story a couple of weeks ago on loitering munition, and there's loads of skepticism around the effectiveness, especially because we know that many of even the older combat vehicles and tanks on both sides of the Russo-Ukrainian war have active protection systems. but Warmate can actually operate in swarms up to 6 loitering munitions at the same time, which can be quite effective in penetrating not just active protection systems, but any sort of communication equipment and military bases. I was talking to one of the company representatives today, and he said that another very popular product of theirs is the Fly-Eye Mini UAS. And the company representative said that this was designed to be operated in synchron with artillery units, because in the Polish armed forces, the artillery units not operate only the artillery guns, but also loitering munitions, UAS, and counter-tank systems. And basically, Fly-Eye can provide the precise location of the target for artillery units, and then obviously it can help sort of correcting the aim.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned how Ukrainian Defence Minister came up with a name for Warmate, and clearly Ukraine is very interested in acquiring loitering munition systems, and indeed has done from the United States in the form of Switchblade from AeroVironment. Have there been any indications of sales of Warmate to Ukraine?
So apparently WB Group has been selling not only Warmate but all the other solutions of theirs as well to the Ukrainian Armed Forces since 2014, 2015. But when I asked the company, they couldn't disclose details. They couldn't say how many of these equipment has been sold or given to Ukraine. Interesting thing is that, again, obviously we don't know the exact details of the war, right? Because information warfare is going on very heavily on both sides of the conflict. But, by own admission of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, one of the Warmate loitering munitions has been shot down a few days ago. And apparently this is only the very first Warmate that was actually disarmed by the Russian side. So that's quite interesting. And I think the other, key thing to mention here, and I think this isn't only coming from WB Group, but all the other companies I was talking to at the show, is that many of the planned projects that were in the pipeline across the whole of Europe has been accelerated very, very significantly, or has been increased in size to a significant extent since February 25th. Okay,
so we're seeing very much a fast tracking of development programs across the field, across the board, from defence manufacturers.
Yes, that is correct. Absolutely. I think it's true also for land system. I was talking to Pearson Engineering yesterday, and also Rank Group said that they have experienced a rapid sort of acceleration of defense projects. Yeah.
And of course, in Poland particularly, there's. I suppose it's a boom time for Polish defence manufacturers, and WB Group is no exception there, given the announcement after the Russian invasion of Ukraine that Poland would be implementing an increased defence budget, increasing the headcount of its armed forces, and also buying a hell of a lot of new equipment.
Yes, but the company, WB Group, didn't indicate anything. Although there is one major project that has been awarded to the company recently, and that's called Gladiatus. It's another type of loitering munition program, but because most part of this acquisition is very sensitive, unfortunately the company couldn't tell me any details about it. What we do know is that this is the single largest contract awarded to a Polish independent company by the Polish military forces. The company said that the contract value is about $500 million, and it only covers the initial part of the contract.
And of course, your day job, so to speak, is there are bound to have been some companies that specialise in that particular thing at Eurosatory. Did you notice anything eye-catching?
Yes, I have. There's not loads of military and training simulation equipment brought to the show, but Cubic, US-based company, has a very interesting, albeit not new system. It's called Blue Shell, and it has been under experiments and testing with the British Army for a number of years now. And the way it works is that Cubic has replaced a number of components on the L118 light gun with the replica components, and that includes the firing box and an in-service 1 to 10th weighted round. The equipment is meant to bridge the gap between the way the British Army currently conducts dry training and the way it does live firing. Soldiers can basically do any kind of drills on this simulator, like failure to fire, load and round, round reject and fire, and anything else that they would basically be able to do with the normal gun. The firing box can be loaded as normal, as the normal L118 guns would be. And the interesting thing is that this gun can be injected into a VBS. The Cubic said that they're in very close collaboration with the VBS producer Bohemia, and they also implemented the new terrain integration system that the company has introduced at the last iTech show. And so when this Blue Shell 105mm gun simulator fires, it can actually, the trainees can actually see the impact of that firing in the simulation.
So that's very interesting. I mean, how soon is it Blue Shell, the system?
It's called Blue Shell because the replica rounds, are actually blue at the tip, but everything, just like in the real rounds, soldiers can calibrate it and it operates as the real one.
Okay, so how quickly is Blue Shell actually going to be used by military trainees, by trainee artillerymen?
There's not concrete news on this one. We know that, going back a little to the Ukrainian conflict, that the US was training and is currently training some Ukrainian personnel in Germany and another undisclosed location in Europe for artillery and various different weapons and systems. And, well, it's not clear whether or not they've been using Blue Shell there, but I don't think that was the case.
Okay. And I'll move on now to Sam. Thank you very much, Norbert, and we'll come back to you. But we'll just move on to Sam. Thank you very much for waiting patiently. I'd just like to ask you about some of the highlights that you've seen. You've been looking a lot at the armoured vehicle manufacturers, and there have been one or two quite high-profile announcements.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. There have been a lot of high-profile announcements. You've had a massive German presence at the show. And I think, the headline news, really, which Chris Voss wrote about for Shepherds, is about Rheinmetall, which unveiled their new KF-51 main battle tank for the next generation, which they're hoping to get out there by the 2030 timeframe. And this is basically a fully indigenously designed tank. They weren't responding to any RFIs, any government requirements. This is something they produce in-house and something they're now putting out on the market. They say it's got a completely digital architecture, that it's got new cannons, it's plastered with all the latest sensors, and it provides the best situational awareness. So they weren't too detailed on what that actually meant, but they're really placing this as a next generation main battle tank. Of course, it raised the big question, given that this is a heavily Franco-German show, about what would happen to the modern ground combat system, MGCS, which is being developed by KNDS.
Indeed.
And they didn't really go into details on this. They said that it wasn't a direct rival to the program, and that actually they would probably be focusing more on the export market. So one can only assume they'll be trying to flog this to states which already use the Leopard, for instance, or the Leclerc tank, notably Jordan, the UAE, maybe the Netherlands, which I think uses the Leopards, and when I went then to the KNDS stand to ask them about what they made of it, they didn't seem too concerned. And they basically said, well, the MGCS is very much a 2040 next generation systems of systems. We still haven't even worked on any of the basic groundwork yet. Let's hold our horses. So there are questions that have been raised about the competition between the two, but I think most people downplayed that at the show. And actually, while I was at the KNDS stand, I got to go see the latest that Nexter have put out in terms of their armored vehicles. And obviously, they were really, really demonstrating the capabilities that come from the Scorpion program, which has basically been the main focus of the French army for the last 10 years. I think they've invested about 10 billion euros in this, and it's essentially replacing or virtually replacing every frontline armored vehicle or upgrading some of the legacy systems. So they demonstrated the Serval, the Jaguar,
Griffon,
Griffon, and then a couple of upgraded Leclerc tanks as well. And this is really basically the mainstay of the French army now. It's a whole networked group of fighting vehicles, which are meant to basically carry the French military into the coming decades.
Very interesting to know that the French have kept the faith with Scorpion. As you said, it's soaked up an awful lot of investment, and it does seem to be an extremely ambitious fleet-wide regeneration program almost. And at the same time, again, as you mentioned, Nexter and KNDS are just trying to push forward with the MGCS program for the next generation Franco-German battle tank. It will be interesting, again, as you mentioned, to see if Rheinmetall do decide to throw the KF-51 into the mix and see where that gets them. But certainly the launch of the KF-51 Panther has turned a lot of heads, both at the show and on social media as well. So it does seem to have been a pretty big reveal.
No, it was very much a big reveal, but I think it almost overshadowed something that we were seeing at the Nexter stand, which is that the Scorpion program is one of the rare programs you can actually refer to, which has been delivered on time, relatively on budget, and actually hasn't placed massive amounts of faith in super high tech. Obviously, they're all bound up with very innovative AI systems, situational awareness systems, but at the same time, when I was speaking to a lot of the French military who were there and a lot of the next representatives, they were saying, well, we've built this, but with technology as a tool rather than technology for the sake of technology. And so that these systems are meant to work in a degraded way, whereas what we're seeing, for instance, with the British Army is they're completely slashing the force structure in favor of high tech, which a lot of people are basically saying is a lot of hot air. So what was actually quite impressive with the Scorpion program was that they've managed to really deliver something that they set out to do, I think, about 10 years ago. And it's come in on time, on budget. And this is something which is quite rare to see in modern defense procurement programs. And, maybe Rheinmetall stole a bit of Nexter's thunder when this should have been the celebration of this program finally maturing. And Emmanuel Macron, the French president, did come to visit the stand, and he had a look at a couple of the vehicles they had there.
Well, I'm sure we'll give Nexter and Scorpion their due in our coverage, and I look forward to finding out more. But there was also something else, Sam. The European debut of the Redback IFV from Hanwha. Obviously, it's not a brand new vehicle, in that it was designed in South Korea. It's also been sold to Australia. But it's revealing, isn't it, that Hanwha was promoting this to a European audience for the first time?
No, it was very revealing. Hanwha had a very big stand at Eurosatory, and this is really sort of filtering into what we already know about Hanwha's quite aggressive posturing in the European defence market now. This follows on to what they've already been doing with the KN9 self-propelled howitzer, which they displayed at DSCI in London in 2021, and which they signed a couple of understanding agreements with Susi Defence, Leonardo, to help manufacture that in the UK. And what the Redback infantry fighting vehicle, as you mentioned previously, it's already been tested in Australia and in South Korea. It was partly developed for the Land 400 program for the Australian Ministry of Defence, and now they're trying to bring it into the European segment. And I sat down with a couple of the representatives there who walked me through the technology. It's a very interesting vehicle, very rugged, very robust, a lot of interesting new technology. They were very sure to mention that it had this, the Iron Fist active protection system from Elbit, given the footage we're seeing from the war in Ukraine, but also its situational awareness suite. So it has a 360 Iron Vision software, which essentially means you put a helmet on the commander's head, and whenever they look around in the IFV, they can basically see what's outside, though they're not even looking through. They'll be looking through the armor, essentially. So they're really trying to demonstrate that this is something that's off the shelf, ready to go, and has already been blooded, so to speak, in places like Australia. And it fits into, as I was saying, this attempt by Hanwha to really demonstrate what they're offering to the European market, that you don't necessarily have to go to one of the old European manufacturers. They were very much happy to also showcase the KN9 self-propelled howitzer, and they basically wanted to demonstrate that there was continuing interest in procuring this, given the news that's coming out of Ukraine.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sam. And I'd just like to sort of throw a few things open to the panel, as it were. And just to follow on from what you were saying, what Sam was saying about Hanwha Defence, there's been a kind of a feeling in the global defence industry over recent years that the established European manufacturers, the likes of KNDS and BAE Systems and Rheinmetall, people like that, they're going to struggle in future to maintain their global market share, particularly as there are a lot of up-and-coming manufacturers in China, in Turkey, and the likes of Hanwha in South Korea. From your experience at the show so far, are you kind of getting that feeling, or is there a lot more confidence from European manufacturers than you'd expect?
I'll go first. It's quite interesting because obviously a lot of these European manufacturers should be getting a big windfall. Some defense budgets have ticked up. The Germans in particular have put in the special 100 billion euros defense fund. So the German companies were quite bullish. A lot of them even saying, how will we ramp up production capacity given all the orders we'll be getting from the German MOD? But at the same time, what I was sort of noticing was that a lot of the big prime manufacturers don't really want to manufacture the whole defense supply chain anymore. They're much more looking at becoming these systems integrators. When I was at the KNDS stand, they were unveiling some of their new concept designs for tanks. And a lot of the equipment in there isn't actually produced by them. They're going to specialists, whether it's Israeli companies who can do battle management software, and they're basically plugging it in to platforms which they're designing broadly. But I think they actually really want to be people who bring together various capabilities into one platform rather than manufacturing the whole basically value chain. But that's just kind of an observation I have. Harry?
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting on that front is there is and there will always remain a difference between countries that have industries that can produce these sizable armoured vehicles like tanks and IFVs and artillery systems, and countries that don't have that capability onshore. So, a Scorpion is a brilliant example. The French buy French vehicles. The French buy French fighter jets, and they buy French ships. Germany is very similar. They buy the Bundeswehr buys its equipment from Rheinmetall and KMW. So, as Sam said, these companies potentially are looking more to specialist providers to fill these new technology areas. And I think the UK is a good example as well, with the recently published Land Industrial Strategy. It says about doing more onshore, doing more for UK suppliers. And I think that the Challenger Free upgrade program is probably a very good example of that. That is seen kind of as a way for the UK to regain its foothold in systems engineering, design and manufacture of a new vehicle, so that when something like the main ground combat system does come around, it will have that capability to do so. and it will have stepped up UK industry from a place where it was before to being on par with some of these European partners, and where the UK was before it had kind of, I suppose, a hiatus in armoured vehicle manufacturing. But there's definitely a lot to say for these companies like Hanwha, who have been on, I think it's fair to say, a pretty rapid surge in terms of market cap and just interest in their vehicles. I think there's definitely been, maybe not necessarily just the show, but in the industry in general, an awakening to what other companies can offer, and that, we see Hanwha competing with the Lynx from Rheinmetall in Australia. So that's going to be a really interesting program to see which wins Land 400 and where the Australians go with what direction. And with Hanwha definitely making strides into Europe, or at least trying to kind of assert their presence and make their thoughts known. It'll be interesting to see if other European partners do come on board. But then naturally, I think the question will go back to kind of industrial work shares. And even if you say do buy the Redback and you're a European customer, do you buy it off a production line that already exists in another part of the world, or does Hanwha, say, maybe work with your local industry to build it in country? So that's probably my 2 cents on the matter. Back to Sam in that matter.
I mean, just adding on to what Harry said, the Hanwha representatives were very much wanted to point out the fact that they would be bringing production facilities to places in Europe. So, again, they're in contention for the Mobile Fires program in the UK, and they've really asserted the fact that they would be bringing production to the UK, just as if they brought the Redback to Europe, that they would look to localise certain production over there. And in Australia, for instance, for the Land 400 program, they've made it a big part of their commitment that they would open facilities, though the new government in Australia has decided to put the program on, not make a decision just yet, so they're still waiting to hear back.
Just one final question, because it's getting rather late, and I know you need to eat your dinner, so I won't keep you for much longer. But we've talked about what has been announced at Eurosatory, what people are keen to talk about. But are there any elephants in the room, important things that are noticeable by their omission? What aren't people talking about at Eurosatory?
I suppose the most obvious one is I haven't had a single conversation this week that hasn't mentioned Ukraine. Whether it's armoured vehicles, missiles, whether that's anti-air missiles or smaller handheld things like Javelin, Stinger. Across the whole spectrum of conversations, Ukraine comes up, whether it's counter-drone companies talking about how it's shown the utility of small UAVs, and then also why you need to counter them. So you've got 2 prongs of that side of the discussion. You've got the UAV manufacturers talking about how Ukraine is showing the importance and the utility of UAVs and small drones. And then you've got the counter-UAV and counter-drone manufacturers talking about the importance of counter-drone technology. So I suppose it's like the eternal cat and mouse game of defence in terms of capability, offensive development and defensive development. And that goes the same for armoured vehicles as well. I don't know if it's the same for the other... For Sam and Norbert, but on an armoured vehicles front, we've seen Ukraine has shown the vulnerability of armoured vehicles, but it's also shown the importance of protection and being under armour. And when you are hit by a munition, armour does save lives. So it's on again, like the UAVs and the counter drones, on both sides of the debate, the armour defence and the armour defeat. It's come up in every conversation I've had.
A ubiquitous feature of the show. Is that the same for you, Norbert?
What I would say is, I think it, I would just add to what Harry has said, is that Ukraine has, revealed a number of things. And what I, noticed particularly at the show is that many companies talk about combined arms training and, consequently, combined arms fighting, because again, we saw on the Russian side that many times the weak point in the operations was potentially the lack of combined armed units or the synchron between the various units. So I think there's a particular emphasis on that with companies such as IAI And the other thing I would say is electronic warfare capabilities and how to train, militaries in electronic warfare environment, or to sort of withstand electronic warfare capabilities.
Okay, and I'll give the final word to you, Sam.
No, I think Harry's absolutely right. Every company has tried to shoehorn Ukraine into fitting a narrative as to why their product is the one to buy and why their product is great. I think what's been interesting is that, what we're seen in Ukraine is that in some ways it harks back to an old style of war, which is these big artillery duels happening. And what I seem to think was a little absence was the lack of talk about strategic depth, maybe. What we know is that Ukrainian forces, Russian forces are running through their munition stocks like crazy, and there hasn't really been much of a discussion about how do you sustain such high-intensity operations in the long run. A lot of these platforms are very exquisite, they're packed with technology, but when push comes to shove, sometimes you just need a lot of something. And I think that's something which some companies aren't exactly sure how to go about just yet, and they're trying to basically say, well, the technology can carry it just as well, rather than needing big amounts of everything.
Thank you very much, Sam. An interesting point on which to end. Thank you also to Harry and Norbert for your time. I hope it's been an interesting discussion, not only for our panellists, but also for our listeners. Speaking of our listeners, if you want to find out more about our defence news and analysis, please visit our website, www.shephardmedia.com/news. The Shephard Defence podcast was brought to you by Shephard Studio, featuring myself, Ben Vogel, Harry Lye, Norbert Neumann, and Sam Beal. Stay tuned for our next episode in July. But for now, that's all. Goodbye.